in Britain before long is a fascinating idea. I still look at the 1.6 million, and there may be about 1 million Yes supporters online. I mean, half the population's on Facebook, so there must be at least 1 million people on Facebook who are Yes supporters, if not more, who are busy focusing, judging by the traffic I'm seeing across my pages and the ones I'm linked to, focusing on elements that I think are part of the family of ideas, like obviously just now on fracking, permission to frack under your house and so on. That's attracting a lot of attention from the Yes campaign people in the Falkirk area, I've noticed, and obviously the continuing attacks on the welfare state. These are popping up quite a lot in the debates. So I think the Yes campaign will continue very broad kirk, and will continue to work on, maybe even turn up and protest, certainly campaign and write and discuss related issues, which I think are part of the family of ideas that the Yes campaign was, are left of centre, critical, humanistic, and so on. I think it looks wonderful from my perspective. 2 years ago, the public sphere in Scotland was a rather sad little thing, like all parts of Western Europe. It was a sad little thing, the letters pages in the Herald and so on. And now it's enormous, absolutely enormous. I think it's glorious.
And the Tories are actually helping it along a bit with, like you said, there's the welfare cuts, but there's also the attacks on the Human Rights Act and a number of things. This is actually fueling the Yes campaign to continue even stronger than before.
It certainly looks that way, although I have slight reservations on the extent to which the Tories attacking the EU and the human rights legislation will be completely oppositional to the majority in Scotland. I think we have to be honest about ourselves as a people and some of our friends and neighbours. I think there are people in Scotland who swallow the idea that the EU and the human rights legislation interfere and cause unnecessary PC-type behaviour. So, I don't think the people of Scotland are immune to the charms of attacking the EU. But I think the balance is different, and that's what's crucial, I think. The balance is considerably different in that these people are much more of a minority than they are, say, in parts of our UK.
Yeah. If we go back to the process in itself, because I think we wanted to talk a little bit about fairness in the whole process. So what were your thoughts? Do you think that the referendum was conducted in a totally fair and above-board way?
No, I don't think it was. I mean, I think it may well be that there have been referenda in other parts of the world conducted even less fairly. There are some quite marked similarities between the Quebec referenda and the Scottish one, I think, in terms of lack of fairness, or fairly, perhaps restrained way, but certainly lack of fairness. If you look at what happened in Scotland, when the pledge was made, I instantly thought, no, they can't do that. They can't. The Edinburgh Agreement says they can't do that. That this is the period of purdah, as it's described, in which no new offers can be made. Nothing can be said that might change the opinion of voters, and particularly something that might change the ballpark for those who've already voted. So in that respect, making the vow in the period of purdah is at the very least, to my mind, unfair, probably illegal. Although I gather the government got out of this by saying they didn't make the offer. That they rather carefully allowed Gordon Brown to think he was doing a great thing, but actually falling into a bear trap, which is appropriate for him in many ways, and allowing him to charge around the country making offers he couldn't substantiate, he couldn't back up. He's a backbencher with no executive authority, and he was making offers on the part of three political parties who don't agree what the offers are, and a government which, in the words of the Foreign Secretary William Hague, made very clear these are just the words that you would use in a political campaign. They're not government policy. And we see, of course, in the aftermath, we see the enormous knots that the three parties are getting themselves into with trying to deliver any of this. I think it was unfair also in that the UK government solicited foreign government and senior officials from NATO and the EU to try to influence the process. That's unfair, I would say. They actively solicited businesses, supermarkets and banks to influence the process. And the fourth item would be, the third being, of course, the additional powers, the vow. The fourth was the possible effects of the Better Together campaign being allowed access to the postal votes. We see today that it wasn't just Ruth Davidson and the Tories that some of the Labour campaigners also had access to that. Now, maybe that had quite a subtle effect on the overall outcome, but again, it's the kind of thing that in a court case where someone is charged of murder would cause the whole thing to fall apart, and you'd have to start all over again. I don't personally want a revote, because I think there's much more to do before we have a revote.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that have gone on around do smell a bit like, as you said, I thought the foreign government stuff was rather nasty. But at the same time, the civil service was always going to be used to campaign against, because it's part of their role. If the current government see Scottish independence as a bad thing, then they would obviously use the powers and the abilities of the government in order to stop it. But I still find it hard to go with that thing. We did well to get to 45% when the whole media was so constantly against us. I still find it quite hard to accept that, but maybe I'm still finding it hard to accept that we lost. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I was very disappointed, and I take little comfort from the achievement in going from 30 to 45%. I take a little comfort from it, but I hope for better. And I must admit, partly I think because I was campaigning in the local area with like minds, and we were signing up people, to register for the first time in their lives. Sometimes people in their 50s who were going to vote for the first time. There was a sense of a surge. Now, we were obviously in a bubble. We were in a bubble. We were telling each other what we wanted to hear. We were meeting nothing but. I mean, the experience in the housing estates or schemes or whatever ones you want to use was friendly, and very friendly. And South Ayrshire is a very unionist, maybe even Tory part of Scotland. The experience we got in the rented housing sector was really tremendously warm, and so I think we got carried away with that, and we expected. Some people were talking 60-70% win, and without laughing.
Yeah, and it didn't turn out that way. But can I just come back to one thing that's sort of off on a little tangent, but you were talking about earlier about the BBC non-political programmes, but I don't know, this is a more general thing about the media. It goes back to something I once heard Chomsky say about people need to realise that there's more propaganda in the soap operas than there is in the news, which I always thought was a rather interesting quote. Like, for example, if you take something like Dragon's Den, people like the programme, but it's basically a hymn to neoliberal capitalism. It's a highly political programme.
Right. Well, to my mind, you've broadened the debate quite a bit with that, and I'm utterly sympathetic to it. I keep forgetting to say at times, that virtually all of what I say is derived from my early experience of reading Chomsky. Chomsky is, to my mind, the hero of the intellectual world. He is the truth teller, and we owe huge amounts to Chomsky in all of this. All of my previous research was in that kind of domain you described, which was about media which are not narrowly political. And I agree entirely with what you said about Dragon's Den. It's reinforcing the normality of capitalism, of competitive, aggressive, exploitative capitalism, and unashamedly doing that. Other programs are much more subtle. Soaps, for example, reinforce shallow consumerism and so on. All culture under capitalism, I would say, not even a Chomskyan way, but in a Marxist way, all culture under capitalism is under capitalism. And therefore, capitalism drives the research into medicine. It drives everything. The profit motive is everywhere. Now, the Yes campaign clearly has become a left-of-centre movement. It's identifiably left-of-centre, the Yes movement. And I was saying earlier that a lot of people since the referendum seem to be maybe temporarily shooting off in directions like protesting against fracking, I mentioned, or against austerity cuts and so on. And I think I see these as part of a cluster, but they are all very left of centre now. I don't know if you're saying to me that the new media in Scotland should be pushing on a broader front, towards a more regulation of capitalism and so on. I say yes. I don't know how much support there is for that. I think there's a lot to be. Yeah, a lot to be done in Scotland in the future. This is just the beginning, or it's the beginning of the beginning, or whatever. And if Scotland were to get independence, it would be a social democracy, I suppose, but it would be an ongoing conflict with corporations and so on. So I think there's a struggle ahead to create a fairer society, but I'd hope this would be the first step.
Yeah, so what I was getting at was political education is necessary, and I don't mean that in the kind of brainwashing sense. I mean, to try and show the interests that might be behind certain presentations of certain ideas. That was the idea.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's interestingly enough, the very subject which teaches that best is one of the lowest status. It used to be sociology back in the past when I did it. Sociology never made it into Scottish schools. It made it into some English schools. But media studies taught properly, could be the best critical analysis of the society we live in, because our society is so heavily mediated. Just about everything we know and understand has been mediated for us. Then the first step, I think, would be a curriculum change. Core media studies
in schools as well.
Yeah, in schools.
Yeah,
but there have been attempts to do that, but it's largely fallen on deaf ears, and it's a tiny minority of students who take it.
And just that brings us round to a nice point to finish on. So, without media studies having been taught in class, what further studies have you got coming up? Or do you think, do you know of anyone who's working on stuff that's going to come and explain what happened in this referendum and how the whole thing was conducted on the mainstream media?
Yeah, well, like most professors, I'm better at blowing my own trumpet than trying to remember the names of other researchers. I've got a book contract to write about the experience, about the referendum process and the mediation of that referendum process. My own experience will be part of it, but I'll be looking at, obviously I'll be looking at websites like your own and how they were present in the debate and may have been influential in the debate. So interestingly enough, it's with Welsh Academic Press. This in itself is quite an interesting point. Welsh Academic Press, their previous publication was a biography of Tommy Sheridan. They commonly do the Scottish sector, Welsh Academic Press, because there's a niche. And the niche is caused by Edinburgh University Press, the top academic publisher in Scotland, Edinburgh Academic University Press. They tend to turn their noses up at what they see as the parochial Scottish context. So if you want to get your stuff published, you've got to go somewhere else. So I've got a book which will be about maybe 80,000 words, and it'll cover the whole referendum period and the mediation of it in particular. That's due maybe out in about March. I've got a paper which will be a book chapter, which will be a smaller version of the same in a book that's due out at the turn of the year. But these are largely based on previous work. In terms of new research, I'm kind of unsure what to do next. I'm not actually carrying out any empirical research right now, and haven't been really since about April. I've largely been, living off the fat, so to speak, of the previous work, and also the engagement. I've had about 40 interviews since the first paper was published. So I think there will be a need for ongoing monitoring of especially the BBC. So I have a feeling I'll return to that. I'm somewhat distracted a bit, of course, by things happening in Palestine and elsewhere, because of my research before, and like the people at the Glasgow Media Group, I think the horror of the Middle East. Sometimes you think, wait a minute, things are quite cosy here in Scotland. Maybe I should be saying, oh, that's fine. Let's just turn our minds to the major problems in the world. So I have a feeling I may well return to research in those areas as well.
Well, the BBC's never had a particularly good record on Israel-Palestine issue, that's for sure.
No, I think you might argue it's even more transparent than the Scottish issue. There's a little more subtlety at times with Scotland's independence, but with regard to Palestine, it's completely kind of knee-jerk, uncritical. There's the occasional attempt, I think, in the BBC. I thought in particular, who was it? There's one of the young presenters who did some of the panel shows. He did the one with all the children in the hydro. I thought he was quite good. So occasionally I see little bits of light when some of them will come on and they'll quickly contradict some stupid comment that the Better Together campaigners said. And he did that. I can't remember his name.
James Cook.
James Cook, yeah. I thought, is he about to come out or be sacked? I don't know which. With Palestine, it's just naked. It's just nakedly. It's not. I don't think it's malevolent and such. It's in a conscious way. It's unconscious bias, racism almost of sorts, which just sees the situation from the apparently westernized Israeli perspective, and it requires tremendous criticism, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So, John, thanks for coming on again. That's been really
Pleasure.
good.
I've enjoyed it.
So there you go. That was Professor John Robertson again. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope to get another podcast out early next week sometime, and hopefully we'll be closer to some of the plans we have for expansion, and I'll be able to tell you a bit more about them then. The only other thing on this show is the guest chooses the tune, and John chose this one, so speak to you next time.